Have you ever felt like you're occupying a space you don't deserve? Like you're playing a role, and at any moment someone will realize you don't actually belong there? Have you ever achieved something you had been striving for? But instead of feeling proud, you could only think that maybe it was just luck? Maybe it happened when you landed that job, got into that university, or received praise for your work. And instead of feeling good, you felt a knot in your stomach. Because deep down, a voice whispered, "I'm not that good. I just fooled everyone. Sooner or later, they'll find out the truth." What if I told you that this feeling has a name? That you're not the only one who experiences this? It's called Impostor Syndrome. And believe it or not, it doesn't choose its victims randomly. It doesn't matter how much you study, work, or push yourself. It doesn't matter how many achievements you stack up. The more you grow, the more the doubt grows with you. Some of the greatest figures in history have felt this way. Albert Einstein, the man who revolutionized physics, admitted before his death that he feared people had overestimated his work. Maya Angelou, a renowned writer and activist, said that every time she published a new book, she was terrified that people would finally realize she didn't know how to write. Even Leonardo da Vinci, one of the greatest geniuses of all time, spent much of his life thinking he would never complete anything truly remarkable. If even they felt this way, what chance do we have? But here's the real question. What if the problem isn't you? What if this doubt isn't a sign that you're not good enough, but rather a distortion in the way you perceive yourself? Because if we look closer, we'll see that this feeling isn't just a psychological phenomenon. It's a trap created by our mind, by society, and even by the philosophical and spiritual structures that shaped our worldview. So today, we're going to dive deep into this question. Why do you feel like you're never good enough? We'll explore what imposter syndrome is and why it happens, what philosophers like Sartre, Nietzsche, and Buddha had to say about this feeling, and most importantly, how we can change this mindset. If you've ever felt this way, stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover could completely change the way you see yourself. Imagine you're in a room full of people who admire you. Everyone is looking at you with respect, waiting for your words, recognizing your talent. They believe you're someone incredible, intelligent, capable. But inside, there's an uncomfortable certainty. If they only knew the truth. This truth, which only you seem to know, is that you're not that good. That, in reality, you're just pretending. That you got lucky. That you've fooled everyone. And sooner or later, someone will figure it out. If this has happened to you, welcome to the club. A club no one chooses to enter, but that has millions of members around the world, some of them the most talented, brilliant, and successful. People in history. This phenomenon has a name, imposter syndrome. Where does this feeling come from? The first thing you need to understand is that this fear isn't a sign of failure. On the contrary, the more competent you are, the more likely you are to feel this way. The concept of imposter syndrome was first described in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. They realized that many highly capable individuals, especially women, felt like frauds, unable to accept that their accomplishments were legitimate. This feeling arises when there's a mismatch between how others see you and how you see yourself. And, believe it or not, this has deep roots in how our brain functions, the psychology of insecurity. Our brain wasn't designed to make us happy. It was designed to keep us alive. And one of the ways it does that is through constant self-criticism. For most of human history, the world was an extremely dangerous place. There were no stable jobs, no comfortable homes, and no guaranteed food. Survival depended on always being alert to danger. If a hunter thought he was good enough and relaxed, he could end up dead the next day. So the brain developed a mechanism that keeps us always on alert, and often, this mechanism manifests as the feeling that we're still not good enough. Additionally, there's another biological factor at play: cognitive dissonance. This happens when we have two conflicting beliefs. I am smart and capable, but I know I'm not perfect and I make mistakes. Our brain doesn't like contradictions. So to resolve this conflict, it makes an adjustment. Instead of thinking, I'm imperfect like any human, it thinks. If I have flaws, then I'm not as good as people think. And it's precisely at this moment that the feeling of fraud is born, the role of social comparison, but there's another factor that makes this feeling even worse. Comparison. We live in a world where, every second, we're bombarded with success, stories. On Instagram, someone is traveling to a paradise destination. On LinkedIn, someone just got promoted. On YouTube, someone your age is a millionaire. The problem? We only see the final result, never the process. You see someone playing the piano perfectly, but you don't see the thousands of hours of solitary practice. You see someone releasing a book, but you don't see the years of rejection and rewriting. You see a successful CEO, but you don't see the failures and uncertainties they faced. And here lies one of the biggest paradoxes of impostor syndrome. We compare ourselves with the best of others, but with our worst. This creates a dangerous illusion that everyone knows what they're doing, except for us. Great geniuses felt this. Two, if you think this insecurity only happens to you, know that some of the brightest minds in history have felt the same. Albert Einstein said that his fellow scientists overestimated his intelligence, and that one day they would realize he was an accidental fraud. Maya Angelou, the writer and poet, confessed that every time she published a new book, she feared people would discover she was a fake. Michelangelo, even after painting the Sistine Chapel, said he had never done anything truly great. If even these people had doubts, maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't you. But if this is so common, how do we overcome it? Now that we understand where this feeling comes from, the big question is, how can we change this mindset? The answer lies in philosophy, spirituality, and how we choose to view ourselves. In the next chapter, we'll dive into the thoughts of Sartre, Nietzsche, Buddha, and other great minds to understand how we can reprogram our self-perception and finally accept that we are good enough. So tell me, have you ever felt like you're never good enough? What do you do when that feeling comes up? If there's one question that has crossed almost everyone's mind, it's this. Who am I to be here? Who am I to write this text? Who are you to pursue success in your field? Who are we to think we can achieve something great? Perhaps this doubt has always existed. From the first humans who dared to step out of their caves to the thinkers who changed the course of history. Because deep down, the question of imposter syndrome isn't just psychological. It's existential, and whenever an existential doubt arises, philosophy and spirituality attempt to provide answers. So today, we're going to explore how some of the greatest minds in history, from Sartre to Buddha, from Nietzsche to Socrates, understood this feeling of inadequacy, and most importantly, how we can use their teachings to change the way we see ourselves. Sartre and existentialism. You're not a fraud, you're free. If you feel like you're fooling others, maybe it's because you haven't yet accepted the weight of your own freedom. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre argued that humans are thrown into the world without an instruction manual. We aren't born with a fixed destiny, a clear purpose, or a ready-made identity. We have to create all of it ourselves, and that's terrifying. Many people prefer to follow a preset path because freedom is a heavy burden to carry. When we realize we are responsible for who we become, inevitable doubts arise. What if I'm choosing wrong? What if I'm not good enough? What if someone finds out I don't really know what I'm doing? For Sartre, the answer to these doubts is not to search for an essence or a destiny that existed before we were born. The answer is to act, take responsibility, and become who we want to be. In other words, you're not a fraud. You're a work in progress. Nietzsche and the eternal return. If you had to live this life forever, what would you do? Imagine that. At the end of your life, a divine being appears to you and says, you will have to live this exact same life with the same mistakes, the same victories, and the same insecurities. Forever. This is the concept of the eternal return, created by Friedrich Nietzsche. If everything repeated endlessly, would you keep playing small? Would you keep doubting yourself? Would you keep running away from your own greatness? Nietzsche believed that the only way to fully live was to embrace life with all its challenges. This means accepting insecurity, accepting the fear of not being good enough, and moving forward anyway. If you feel like an imposter, maybe it's because you're trying to meet an impossible ideal of perfection. But Nietzsche would say, don't try to be perfect. Try to be authentic. The middle way. What did Buddha teach about self-acceptance? If Western philosophy challenges us to take ownership of our freedom, Eastern philosophy teaches us to observe the mind without being controlled by it. Buddha realized that the root of human suffering lies in attachment, and that includes attachment to our self-image. Impostor syndrome happens because we create a fixed identity and fear that it will be exposed. But Buddha teaches that we are not a rigid identity. We are a constant flow of change. You are not a genius, a failure, a fraud, or any other fixed label. You are simply someone living and learning. The middle way teaches us that we don't have to cling to arrogance or insecurity. We are not as great as we wish to be, but we are also not as insignificant as we fear. We are simply human, and accepting that is liberating. Plato and the world of forms. Why do you feel like you're I? Never good enough? Have you ever felt like you have a perfect image in your mind of who you should be, but you never quite reach that ideal? If so, congratulations. You've just stepped into Plato's territory. Plato believed that everything in the physical world is just an imperfect shadow of what exists in the world of forms. You can imagine the best version of yourself, but that version will never be fully realized in reality. This means there will always be a gap between what you envision and who you actually are. But here's the key insight. This doesn't mean you're a fraud. It means you're on the path of growth. The greatest trap of the mind is believing that we can only take action once we are fully ready. But the truth is, we will never be completely ready. What matters is moving toward who we want to become, without waiting for perfection. Now that we understand how philosophy and spirituality view this feeling of self-doubt, we have a choice. We can continue to be trapped by the belief that we're not good enough, or we can recognize that Sartre reminds us that we are responsible for becoming who we want to be. Nietzsche teaches us to embrace insecurity and take action anyway. Buddha shows us that we don't have to be attached to the idea of being good enough. Plato explains why we never feel like we've reached our ideal, and why that's normal. In the end, it all comes down to a single question. If you stopped worrying about being good enough, what would you do? Imagine the following scenario. You are faced with an incredible opportunity. It could be a promotion at work, the chance to lead an important project, or even the realization of a dream that once seemed far away. But at the very moment everything is about to happen, a voice in your head whispers, "What if I'm not good enough? What if they find out I'm a fraud? What if I fail miserably?" Suddenly, excitement turns to fear, and without realizing it, you begin to self-sabotage. If this has ever happened to you, know that you're not alone. Impostor syndrome affects even the greatest geniuses in history. Maya Angelou, Albert Einstein, Michelle Obama, all of them confessed that, at some point, they felt they didn't deserve their success. The difference? They learned to act despite the fear, and that's exactly what we're going to explore now. How do we escape the trap of "I'm not good enough" and start truly living? Step 1. Unmasking imposter syndrome. Before anything else, we need to understand an essential fact. Imposter syndrome is not the truth. It's simply an interpretation of reality. It happens because your mind creates a narrative where everyone is competent, except for you. Think about it. You know your flaws, your mistakes, and your moments of insecurity, but you only see the finished product of others, the end result, not the behind-the-scenes work. This creates an illusion. You feel smaller than you truly are, and others seem greater than they really are. The first step in overcoming this feeling is recognizing that your brain is tricking you. So the next time you think, "I'm not good enough," ask yourself, is this a fact or just a thought? Do I have real evidence that I'm incompetent, or am I simply comparing myself to an idealized version of others? Most of the time, the answer will be, it's just a thought, not a fact. Step 2. Reprogramming the mind. The proof. Journal now that you've identified the lie. It's time to replace it with a more realistic truth. One of the most powerful techniques. For this is the proof journal. Here's how it works. Every day, write down at least 3 small victories that prove your competence. Whenever your mind tells you you're not good enough, read this list. Over time, your brain will start to build a new narrative based on facts, not insecurities. It may sound simple, but neuroscience shows that writing something repeatedly helps change thought patterns. And when you change your internal narrative, your reality starts to change too. Step 3. Embrace the process. No one is ever fully prepared. Have you? Ever noticed that the most successful people in the world never feel ready? That's because no one is ever 100% prepared for anything. If you wait for the perfect moment to act, guess what? You'll never act. Great leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs start even when they feel insecure. The difference is that they don't let that insecurity paralyze them. So, the next time imposter syndrome appears, try to change your thought from, "I'm not good enough for this," to, "I can learn as I go," because that's exactly how success happens. Not before you start, but during the journey. Step 4. Use the character technique. If you're afraid of exposing yourself, try a simple but powerful trick. Wear a character. This may sound strange at first, but it works because the brain has an easier time acting when it sees it as a role, rather than something definitive about your identity. Beyoncé created the persona Sasha Fierce to overcome her shyness on stage. David Bowie created Ziggy Stardust to gain confidence. Many actors, writers, and speakers use this trick to perform better. So ask yourself, if I were a confident character, how would I act? How would I speak? How would I walk? How would I present myself? This subtle shift can be enough to take you out of paralysis and put you into motion. Step 5. The what if. Often, we feel like imposters because we fear the judgment of others. But what if? No one is paying as much attention as you think. You don't have to be perfect to be respected. The mistakes you fear making are insignificant in the long run. Whenever your mind starts to sabotage you, try using the magic question. What if this isn't as big of a problem as I imagine? This simple change in perspective can dissolve many insecurities and help you move forward. Recap: how to overcome imposter syndrome. Step 1. Identify the lie. Your thoughts are not the reality. Step 2. Write daily proof of your competence. Step 3. Accept that no one is 100% prepared. Step 4. Use a character to boost your confidence. Step 5. Question your fear with the what if. Question: now tell me, which of these strategies will you try first? And most importantly, what would you do today if you weren't afraid of being a fraud? Have you ever noticed how much of our lives are spent trapped in a cycle of comparison? We look at others and ask ourselves, why is he more successful than I am? Why does she seem so confident and I don't? Will I ever be good enough? But this external search never leads to a satisfactory answer. In Chinese philosophy, there is a concept called Wu Wei, which can be translated as effortless, action or flow with life. Ancient Taoists believed that true excellence doesn't come from desperately trying to outdo others, but from the ability to evolve naturally, without resistance, like a river flowing along its course without forcing itself to be anything other than what it is. This leads us to an even deeper idea. One of the most powerful maxims in Western philosophy says, true nobility is not being better than others, but being better than your former self. And when we think about this, we realize something essential. True growth doesn't come from comparing ourselves to others, but from comparing ourselves to who we were yesterday. The wisdom of Master Kong and self-transformation Confucius, or Master Kong, Kongzi, one of China's greatest sages, believed that the greatest challenge for a human being was not defeating their enemies, but cultivating themselves. He said, "If you see a wise man, try to imitate him. If you see a foolish man, examine yourself." Notice the depth of this teaching. Instead of merely looking at others with envy or insecurity, we should use them as a mirror. What can this person teach me? What do I admire in them that I can bring into my own journey? And at the same time, when we see flaws in others, we should ask ourselves, do I also carry this within me? After all, we are not here to prove our worth to anyone. We are here to improve ourselves, step by step, day by day. Comparison as mental prison. Imagine a great martial arts master. When he enters the dojo, he doesn't worry about who is the strongest in the room. He doesn't think, am I better than that student? He thinks, am I better than I was yesterday? The master knows that the only real competition is with his former self, and this mindset frees him. Because when you stop comparing yourself to others and start focusing on your own journey, something incredible happens. The fear of not being good enough disappears. The need for external validation loses its power. Progress becomes inevitable. Impostor syndrome torments us because we are constantly comparing ourselves to unrealistic standards. But if we focus on the path of continuous self-transformation, we realize that we don't need to be perfect. We just need to be better than we were yesterday. The river of life and the secret of natural growth. Ancient Taoists saw life as a constantly moving river. The river doesn't fight against the rocks, it flows around them. The river doesn't compare itself to other rivers, it follows its own course. The river doesn't worry about being judged, it simply flows. This is nature's great lesson. Growth doesn't need to be a struggle. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to reach an impossible ideal. You just need to keep moving, one step at a time. If today you learned something new, if today you took a small step forward, then you've already won. What if? Now I want to leave you with one final reflection. What if you started measuring your progress not by what others have achieved, but by what you have already evolved? You stopped judging yourself so harshly and simply allowed yourself to learn and grow at your own pace? You looked back and realized that, despite the struggles, you've already come a long way. The truth is that you're not an imposter. You're a traveler in the middle of your journey. And as Lao Tzu, the great Taoist master, said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So what will your next step be? Leave a comment and tell me, what would you do today if you decided to grow just to surpass your former self? Remember, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep moving forward.